For anyone who's been watching me for a long time, this might surprise you, but I am not a Tommy Robinson supporter. I'm a supporter of not being imprisoned for the sounds that come out of your mouth. Now, I understand that there is a lot of complexity in regards to this person in particular and the case that he was actually jailed for. And I also recognise that this is going to be a very controversial topic to speak about. Now, I'm not one to shy away from an issue because the issue is too divisive. Because the only people who can have anything negative to say about it are the people watching me, and no offence, but you are strangers on the internet. In the same breath, I've also got to say that I'm a firm believer in the idea that dialogue is pointless if that dialogue does not have an avenue where it can lead to mutual understanding at the very least. So with that in mind, I want to say that if you've looked at this video's title and you disagree with it, you're ready to, do you know what I mean, give me your 2 cents. I welcome that. All I ask before you do that is just a little bit of respect in the form of hearing me out first. If you are not prepared to hear me out, you cannot expect me to be prepared to read your comment. Now, when I had my big break on YouTube, I was 17 and I'd make a lot of offensive jokes. That's how I got my start. That's how I have the subscriber count that you can see. And I'm not abandoning that era of my career. Even if I have changed a lot as an individual, I still believe conclusively that laughter is one of the most important elements of the human experience. One element that I didn't like about that stage in my life, however, is the fact that some people would assume that my on-camera personality was a direct indication as to what my off-camera personality was. An example being, my mum was off to a family meal one night many years ago and she asked me to come with her. She asked me because these were long-lost family members. Some of them she had never met before. She was a little bit nervous. She wanted me to tag along. So I came with her to this meal, and to my surprise, because I had only recently started getting views on YouTube, one of the gents sat around the table had actually watched me. He watched me quite consistently on YouTube. He watched the jokes I was making. He wrongly assumed that because of the sense of humour that I projected online, that I would share his political beliefs. Political beliefs that he went on to chew my fucking ear off with for the entire meal. All of these beliefs centred around the idea that all of his problems in life, all of his individual inconveniences in his life were due to the presence of brown people in the United Kingdom. He had no responsibility for anything that had gone wrong for him, and it was all because of immigrants. Now, with that said, I do not consider myself a fairy. I understand that there are strong arguments on the side of anti-immigration, and I'm also not a part of the group of people who believe that racial stereotypes are just non-existent. A group that would even suggest that if you so much as acknowledge that some attributes can be consistent with particular races, you yourself are a racist. I don't believe that whatsoever. I believe stereotypes can exist based upon race. For example, if I get cut up in traffic, I know for a fact it's either going to be a brown man or a white woman. Do you know what I mean? Some of these things are just, it's just reality. It's okay to recognise patterns. Now, jokes aside, the fella I was sat with was not a bloke who simply recognised patterns. It was very clear that he had some genuine hatred in his heart for people who did not look the same as him. And this bloke, who I did not have any further contact with beyond this awkward, estranged family meal, suggested that I watch Tommy Robinson. He was actually the person who introduced me to Tommy Robinson's existence. So my initial impression of Tommy Robinson and the type of people that he attracts was not a good one. I think for me, that really set the scene to let me know what Tommy Robinson was all about. And he just did not interest me, to put it politely. Now, that's not to shit on him, or his supporters even. Because as I said earlier, dialogue without an eventual possible outcome of mutual understanding is very pointless in my world. I don't believe in dialogue just to attack someone. So I'm not saying that to drive home a point of how racist I think Tommy Robinson is. I'm saying it to prop up the idea that we can fundamentally disagree with someone and their values while still acknowledging that even an individual we may not like should not be jailed for the words that come out of their mouth. This is a point where those of you who are familiar with this case might be getting ready to get on your keyboards and once again, and inform me how Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Tommy's real name, he wasn't put away for words that were coming out of his mouth. He was put away for contempt of court. I understand. Buckle up, because this is where my opinions get a lot less fence-sitting and a lot more controversial and direct. Tommy Robinson was ordered not to repeat claims about a Syrian refugee, and he repeated those claims regardless, which led to his contempt of court conviction. I do not believe that our courts of law should even possess the power to demand that we are not to speak on a certain thing under threat of imprisonment. In my opinion, no matter how you sugarcoat it, a court having the power to lock you away for the sounds that your mouth makes completely disintegrates the notion that we have freedom of speech. I agree that freedom of speech does not mean and cannot mean freedom of consequences, but I stand by the idea that it should mean freedom from being thrown in jail. To be more specific about the case, Tommy made a series of accusations surrounding an alleged racist attack that happened in a Huddersfield school in 2018. A Syrian refugee was filmed being assaulted, but according to Tommy Robinson, there was more to the story, with Tommy going on to allege that a narrative had been twisted to victimise someone who should not have been seen as the victim. The Syrian refugee and his representatives went on to sue Tommy Robinson, and the court ruled in favour of them, leading to Tommy having to pay out £500,000 in both retribution and legal fees. In my eyes, that could be a fair example of freedom of speech without freedom of consequence. The court ruled that Tommy libelled the boy, and therefore Tommy had to pay out for that. Fair enough. I'm not going to get into whether I believe the court ruling was correct or not, because that's not the point of this video, and frankly I'm not informed enough to really dive deep into that one. The far more important point that I want to touch on is that on top of ordering Tommy Robinson to pay out for the defamation, the court also ordered that he no longer speak about this case ever again. And when he ignored that and spoke about it anyway, that's when he was locked behind bars. As you probably now gathered, the problem that I take from all of this has nothing to do with the case itself, but rather the judiciary system. If Tommy Robinson was to continue to make false claims about the same person, then Tommy Robinson should continue to get fucking sued over and over again if necessary, but not thrown in jail. Not for words. By now, a lot of you probably would have realised that the overall message I'm trying to convey with this video has a lot less to do with Tommy Robinson and a lot more to do with the state of free speech in the UK. In fact, I'll come clean and admit that I used Stephen's stage name just to get outrage clicks. I knew that putting Tommy Robinson in the title will get your attention. I wanted to attract the type of people who in normal circumstances will click a video with this title just to argue in the comments. And I tell you what, while I've got you here, let me disarm you further by saying that my gut tells me that Stephen Yaxley Lennon is a grifter, a man who has orchestrated a persona to position himself as the mouthpiece for a group of people who probably feel underrepresented. I am of the belief that the Tommy Robinson character could well be a ploy to extract attention and line the pockets of a man who has realised just how profitable it can be to stir up division. And even with all of that said, I still believe that Tommy Robinson, you and I, we should all be free to speak without fear that our words will land us in a prison cell. As overstated as this argument may be, it's important to remember that protecting freedom of speech matters most of all when it concerns the speech of someone that we may disagree with. You and I aren't going to instinctively seek to suppress the speech of someone who subscribes to our own worldviews, because why would we want to silence a voice that matches ours? The notion of freedom of speech becomes its most valuable when it is protecting those who we may vehemently disagree with, those who offend us with their words, those who we may assume have ill intention, because it's only when we find issue with the words being used when the words must be protected. The whole idea of freedom means that freedom of speech cannot and will not ever mean freedom of consequences, because as much as you are free to speak, someone else is free to react. But those consequences should never amount to the removal of your actual freedom. If the state can jail you for words, but then in the next breath tell you that you still have freedom of speech, then the state cannot be trusted. If you'd like to hear me talk about this in further detail, then there is a video on my Patreon right now doing just that. The link to the video is in the description. Alternatively, just Google patreon.com/Brad exclusive. If you're watching this video on the day that it goes out, I'll be live streaming tonight at 10 PM UK time on my second channel, Brad Does Banter live streams. And if you're too lazy to type that into the YouTube search bar with your big fat fingers, that's also linked in the description. Thank you for watching. Healthy debate is welcomed in the comments. Obviously, if you start calling me a big fat ugly prick because you don't agree with me, I'll probably just hide you, because freedom of speech don't exist on my channel. I mean, you shouldn't be put in prison, but I'll fucking block you from speaking if you insult me, dickhead. I don't mind being a hypocrite, but yes, feel free to have a healthy debate. Even if you disagree with me, let me know. And yeah, man, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.